In my memories of Dad, of John, probably the two things um, that I treasure the most are the things that he passed on to me. Uh, the I think the most important of those were a love of learning, a love of knowledge, and a willingness to keep one's mind open um, to any kind of learning, to any kind of knowledge. And I think the other thing is his integrity. One of the stories I remember from when I was a kid, um, probably not more than 11 or 12, I remember Dad had started working for the Park Service in 1972, and he loved the national parks and he loved the public lands, and he thought the national parks were amazing treasures. So he tried to take us to national parks whenever we went on family vacations. We always tried to go to the national parks. And I remember Dad did not like the idea that national parks were starting to charge people to get in. That was a program that they just started, I think, in the late 1960s or early 1970s. They started charging people to get in. And I remember we were in line to get into a national park, and I think it was probably Mesa Verde. And I remember saying to him, "Well, Dad, you work for the Park Service. Why don't you just show your ID and we can get in for free?" And I remember Dad didn't get upset. He didn't get angry. He just thought a minute and he said, "Son, all of these people around us have to pay to get into the national parks. If they have to pay to get in, we should have to pay to get in too." And I think it was a relatively small thing at the time, but what it showed me was that integrity comes not just in the big major things, but integrity and character can also be shown in very small ways. Um, and I think that both of those are both his integrity and his love of learning and his appreciation and respect for knowledge were the most valuable things that he ever gave to me. And those are things that I treasure to this day, and that um, I hope will be passed on to everyone in the family, because I think they were truly the greatest gifts that Dad could ever have given us. And we'll miss him.
My name is Jackie Powell, and I worked with John at the National Park Service from 1974 until he left for CSU. We remained good friends over the years after that. He was like a big brother to me, teaching me, for instance, how org charts don't always reflect the true organization. He guided the paperwork through to convert my position from temporary to permanent, for which I am forever grateful. In the mid-70s, when he was working on a project on Grant Coors Ranch in Montana, he would pop out of his office to share a fascinating tidbit or two he had found. I appreciated Grant Coors deeply when I finally visited the ranch, mostly because of John's backstory tales. Over the years, I also appreciated John's reminiscence of his time at the Park Service and his bottomless store of wacky jokes. Safe travels, John.
I was so sorry to learn of John's passing, but I've truly enjoyed reflecting on our early years together. My condolences to his wife and children. On July 5th, 1973, I first walked into the National Park Service Historic Preservation Team office, then temporarily installed in a huge open bay above Joslin's department store in the old Villa Italian Mall in Lakewood. Among the first person I met was John Albright, an outgoing and sprightly historian, himself fairly recently joined with the NPS Historic Preservation Team, which had transferred from Washington, D.C. and was headed by then veteran and venerable historian Merrill J. Mattis. John fast became a colleague and remained so for several years. I was immediately struck by his knowledge of the federal system, so to speak, his friendliness and his loquaciousness. He was instantly helpful as I settled into the program, which at that time focused on the American bicentennial and those National Park Service parks that directly related to that history. I must say that I was amazed at John's helpfulness, his good humor, and his friendship, along with that of others in our cadre. As I recall, he invited me to lunch there in the mall, as well as to dinner at his home with his family. John had been in federal service for quite a number of years even then, and his knowledge of how to function in that bureaucracy proved of immediate help to me. Suffice it to say that I probably battered him with myriad questions and concerns as I began my own tenure as a public historian. Our job in those early days was to research and write history studies targeting the role of given parks focused on aspects of the colonial period and the American Revolution. And John was a ready fount of knowledge and proved an able consultant and aid for our initial work. Our jobs took us all over the country, and at this time particularly to parks and various state, federal, and private repositories in the East, where we mined for data to complete our reports on aspects of the Revolutionary War. These assignments were later expanded all across the country following the bicentennial. In later years, following that focus, our projects became more diversified, and eventually our core team was split up, its members assigned among the several regional planning branches. Over the years, our relationships changed somewhat. John, as I recall, properly changed his focus to management in the reorganized Denver Service Center, and we did not work together as closely as before. I stayed in history, and John and several others became successful managers on other teams, so I did not see him as much during the years preceding his retirement. My best thoughts of John were always of his thoughtful advice and considerate help when I was a novice historian on the historic preservation team. I relished his good humor, his wit, his intelligence, and his readiness to help me with questions and concerns during my transitional months in 1973 and 1974. Years later, following his retirement, John called on me once or twice to speak to his classes at Colorado State University in Fort Collins, and we had a chance to catch up with each other's activities. I always admired him for staying in touch. I last saw him at a luncheon a few years back. I'll miss him greatly, and I'll remember him as an early, thoughtful friend during my rookie season, so to speak. I'm saddened by his loss, but I'll cherish his memory forever. Thank you.
John Albright was to me the most generous, loyal, supportive, patriotic, and get-it-done man I've ever known. I have a million vignette memories of him, including his always impeccable appearance. For a number of years, John invited me to lecture to his history class at CSU. I lectured on the interpretation of history. He usually drove me up there to Fort Collins. We had long talks about his childhood in Panama, his military service, his teen years, and his children. It was during that time that he gave me some instructions about how to clean my glasses and that I might need a manicure. He was always wanted the best for all of his friends. And I took these suggestions as examples of the wide range of his interest and good wishes for everyone. He was also dedicated to the National Park Service. We worked on the same Northeast team at the Service Center here in Denver, and where we provided professional service to national parks in the eastern part of the United States. He was an exceptionally good project manager and of considerable help to me in developing my management skills. Also during this time, he took a great deal of interest in developing a possible new national park encompassing a number of important historic sites in western Pennsylvania. It was also during this time that he became interested in the arts and crafts movement of the earliest 20th century, leading to a scholarly study of Marie Zimmerman, one of its best-known artists, and also to John's becoming a collector of stretch glass, a style of glass associated with the arts and crafts movement. And this became an enthusiasm he shared with his cherished wife. John was a memorable person and one who made a great deal of difference in my life. I will remember him always with the fondest warmth.
My name is Craig Cellar, and I knew John during his years with the National Park Service. In 1978, the National Park Service transferred me to the Denver Service Center, the office that does the planning, design, and construction for all of the parks in the National Park system. I met John shortly thereafter. We ended up together in a planning division for the eastern portion of the country. I swear I knew John knew everything. Anytime I had a question about a park, the politics of the National Park Service, or who someone was, or who to contact for information, John knew. Each morning, a number of us would gather before the office opened and talk. Sometimes it was silly stuff, sometimes it was projects, and sometimes it was just office politics. But it cemented our friendship. It wasn't long before John, Nan, Rickey, Jackie Powell, and I were going to lunch. We all loved Mexican food, and I swear we must have gone to every Mexican restaurant in Lakewood. Nan came up with a journal, and we each provided funny critiques for the restaurants we ate at. What good times we had. I still have that book. John would regale us with stories from his childhood growing up in the Panama Canal Zone, his tours of duty as a military historian in Vietnam, his time working at the Gilcrease Museum, and his current work with the National Park Service. He was a good storyteller. After John retired, I tried to keep up the contact. Occasionally, John would come to Denver, and Nan and Jackie and Jerry Greene and I would all get together for lunch and reminisce. No one could reminisce like John. I will miss John. He was one of a kind.